Welcome back to the shop. In this video we're going to be talking about pistons, forged versus cast, your Wiseco's versus your Vortex versus OEM pistons. We're going to 2-strokes and 4-strokes. We're going to be weighing them, measuring them, and talking about which type of piston fits what application best. So let's dig in. On my last video, piston ring-in gap, I received a request for a video to discuss forged versus cast, so that's why I'm making this video right here. We're gonna go ahead. Holy cow. Hey, I'm making a video. You're going to have to chill out. So anyway, after being interrupted by Beavis, let's go ahead and dig in. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start by going to Vortex's website where they discuss the difference between cast and forged from their angle. Let's see what they have to say. Now we're focusing on the 2-stroke piston as of right now. Towards the end of the video we'll talk about the 4-strokes. Because a cast piston's ability to contain higher silicon content compared to forged pistons, and because 2-strokes have lower cylinder pressures when compared to 4-strokes, cast pistons are ideal for 2-stroke engines. Vortex pistons are gravity cast from an aluminum alloy with 18% silicon content. Silicon is important because it decreases thermal expansion, which changes the geometry after the piston reaches operating temperature. With low thermal expansion characteristics, Vortex pistons can be run at tighter tolerances compared to forged pistons. This creates better power and performance, also making them less susceptible to rattling and breaking. Silicon gives the pistons better wear characteristics and prolongs piston life by decreasing piston wear on the cylinder skirt. Now, reading that, you would think, well, Vortex only makes cast pistons, but that's not true. They actually do sell a forged piston. They consider it their race piston. So let's go back to the bench. Now we'll discuss the Vortex pistons in a few minutes a little bit more, but let's talk about OEM cast pistons versus the Wiseco forged piston. This is a YZ250's piston right here. First thing we're going to do is compare the weight. Okay, so if you compare only the piston, let's see here. The stock piston on a YZ250 weighs 8.16 ounces. Now, keep in mind, this is a slightly used piston. It has about 8 hours on it from my YZ250 when it was brand new. And this is a slightly used Wiseco piston. So keep that in mind. They're both used though. So the Wiseco weighs 8.04 ounces. This, again, the OEM's 8.17. So that's just the piston. But now let's weigh the wrist pin. This is the OEM Yamaha wrist pin. It's 1.99 ounces. And here's the Wiseco wrist pin. It's 1.7. So let's go ahead and put the OEM piston with the OEM wrist pin in there. We're getting a 10.15 ounces. Which is the same to the Wiseco. A 9.73. So overall, the Wiseco, now this is just the Pro Light piston. The Wiseco Pro Light piston is a lighter piston. Now we will be discussing the Racer Elite piston towards the end of the video as well, for you guys that are curious about that. That's a slightly different piston that Wiseco offers. But this is their standard Pro Light piston, as they call it. It's just their standard Wiseco forged piston. It's a good piston. I like them. I use them. So now we know that that's lighter. How about the YZ125? We're not going to go ahead. We're not going to do the whole wrist pin way. We're just going to do the Wiseco wrist pin with the piston. Of course, the piston rings on all of these. We have the piston rings on them as well. So there's your Wiseco at 5 ounces, 5.13. All right, and here's the OEM one. Both slightly used pistons, both of them. And 5.40. So again, the Wiseco is lighter, even on the YZ125, than the OEM piston. So how does that make a difference, having a lighter piston? Well, you'll hear people talk about having their piston balanced to the crank or a balance factor. A balance factor is basically the ratio of how of where this crank is balanced to the piston. There's a heavier side on this crank. You see the holes that are drilled out on this side? You see how it's built right here? There's holes drilled out on this side that make this side of the crank lighter than that side. Obviously, it has a rod on it and stuff like that, but most cranks are going to be heavier. You see how it falls in my hand with the wrist pin, I mean the lower rod bearing pin rising a little higher. So this is the heavier side of the crank. Now, there is a balance factor, and you can choose a 55% balance factor. There's all kinds of, I'm not a crank expert here. I'm not going to pretend to be, but I will just tell you what I know. And there is a balance factor, but it changes as you give the bike more throttle or more RPMs, right? So what it takes to compress you got a piston on here, it's compressing the charge, is going to change how the crank reacts to its balance factor. There are companies that put together cranks or will modify your bike, and they will change the balance factor of your crank, and oftentimes they will claim that it is a higher inertia crank, meaning they're adding more weight down here on this side. And what that does in theory is when it goes to compress the charge, as it's compressing, the crank's going to slow down a little bit because there's energy lost compressing the charge, and it'll slow it down a minute amount. The weight that's on one side of the crank can help that out, and it helps keep it from slowing down as much as it's compressing the charge. So by adding more weight to this side of the crank, a higher inertia crank can be considered a performance thing, although it can also come with maybe ever so slight vibrations. But even if you had a perfectly balanced crank for the throttle that you're at in the riding conditions you're at, on most bikes you're still going to get a little bit of vibration, because all we can do is balance from up and down, not the front to back. So when that weight's swinging right there, there's going to be some front and back vibration, unless you have a counterbalancer that some bikes do have. The YZ250 and the YZ125 do not. Some of your KTMs do, but that's a whole nother topic. The point I'm getting at is with a single cylinder motor, there is really no way to tune out all vibrations. It's just, you can't, not with a single cylinder. But you can tune a little bit, and so by adding weight here, it increases the inertia. But another way to do that is just by using a lighter piston. So that is the advantage of using a lighter piston on a two-stroke, is in theory it changes your balance factor to provide a little more inertia on the crank, compress the charge a little bit more solidly or easily, and produce better power. So oftentimes when someone installs a Wiseco piston on their, going from an OEM piston to a Wiseco Pro Light on their YZ125 or YZ250, they might notice a small increasement in power. And I believe that's why, because the piston is a little bit lighter. Not only that, but it's been brought to my attention in the past this wasn't the case, but it seems to be currently, that at least on the YZ250, the crown height here, the dome, is actually a hair bit taller on the YZ250's Wiseco piston versus the OEM piston. I've measured the squish band clearance between the two, and I think it was like about a 3 or 4 thousandths difference. It wasn't much, but it's there. And if you have a custom cylinder head with the squish band clearance set about 40 thousandths of an inch, and you didn't want to go any tighter than that, well, now if you go from an OEM piston to a Wiseco, you might find yourself at about 36 or 37 thousandths of an inch. So keep that in mind if you have a custom head. If you have a stock head, don't even worry about it. The gap is so thick between the squish band and the head, don't even worry about it. You're going to get a performance increase because it will make it a hair bit tighter, and also bump the compression up just a hair amount. And even your aftermarket off-the-shelf cylinder heads like Apex, same thing. Their squish band clearances come to at about 50 thousandths of an inch, which is kind of safe, pretty conservative. If you were to use a Wiseco piston, it might tighten you up about 4 thousandths. Not a big deal at that point. It's only when you actually have a custom cylinder head that was set pretty tight for your bike that you might want to recheck your squish band if you're going from an OEM to a Wiseco. It's always good to check that anyway if you're changing pistons, honestly. If you're changing the brand or the type of piston. But that's typically why some people, when they go from a stock OEM piston to the Wiseco, they might notice a ever so slight performance improvement, and that's good. Let's go ahead and measure these pistons now. I'm going to start with the YZ250 here, and I'm going to start with the stock one. I'm going to measure always above where the wrist pin goes in, because that's where the piston receives the least amount of wear. Let me shut this light off so I don't blast you guys with light. Okay, the crown up here, the top of the piston on this OEM one measures 65/41. Obviously, I'm just using a Harbor Freight caliper here. There's more accurate ways to test this, but this will be good enough to get it done. So let me get another shot here. Okay, about 65/72. Let's measure the crown of the Wiseco. Same thing, 65/72. So the top of these pistons are just as big. They're equal. Go ahead and measure the bottom here. I'll just be measuring same place, but on the bottom, but same place on the same side the wrist pin slides into. Getting a 66/08 for the OEM. For the Wiseco, it's gonna be tough because I have just a little narrow spot to get it on there. But let me do it. 66/09, 66/08. These pistons measure pretty much the same, right? So I've heard some people say that. Now this is a B piston, by the way, from Yamaha, and we'll talk about the piston sizes in a second here on the Yamaha, the A, B, C, and D. But I often hear people say that these forged pistons, the Wisecos, fit looser, and that's why they're more rattly or they make more noise. But based on this little cheap gauge right here, they're looking like they're the same. Now, does that make a difference? This is just a cheap gauge, right? And we're doing millimeters here, but I can tell you the difference between an A piston and a D piston on the Yamahas is only 0.01 of a millimeter. That's the difference right there. Oh, 0.01 of a millimeter, going from the smallest A to the biggest D size Yamaha OEM. That's the difference. We're not even seeing the difference between these two pistons right here. Of that, for the most part, they're pretty equal. So yeah. Now, to mitigate some of that noise that a forged piston can make versus the stock cast piston, Wiseco has went ahead and started adding these black coatings right here, and it's also to help it form to your cylinder if you have a cylinder or a D size cylinder on your Yamaha, or if it's a KTM. I think they have just two sizes, your 1 or your 2. But that's to help, you know, control the noise or sound, and it does a good job at it. Historically, before they started putting this coating on there, Wisecos were known to make a little bit of a piston rattle sound at idle, but you know, that's just something you put up with when you needed a stronger piston that wasn't going to break on you. So the Wisecos were they started adding this black coating on it, and that does a good job of keeping that noise down, and it's a good thing. All right, how about the YZ125 here? Sorry, I don't have any KTM pistons on hand to measure, but we'll get an idea what's going on with these Yamaha ones at least. Okay, so for the Yamaha 125, 53/43 up top for the Wiseco. Yep, pretty much the same thing for the OEM. Let's measure the bottom side now. $53.68 for the OEM. $53.68 for the Wiseco. Again, they're pretty much the exact same size. So there we go there. Now stick around towards the end of this video where I will play a clip from one of my previous videos where I had the Racer Elite piston on the YZ250 here to compare the sizes. That one actually measures a little bit different than both the Pro Light and the OEM piston. But stick around towards the end and I'll show you the clips from that video where I was measuring that one. So far we know they measure the same, the OEM versus the Wiseco's on the Yamahas. And so far we know that the Wiseco's are a little bit lighter than the Yamahas. So if you choose to run a Wiseco piston and you're concerned about ring end gap, again, before you start following these rings, don't do that. Please go down the description and click the link to my ring end gap video before you start following down any piston rings, because as long as you have a stock cylinder, honestly, it's plug and play. Just put it in. Okay, so one of the myths out there, I believe it's a myth at least, is that a forged piston is going to wear out your cylinder faster, right? In my experience, it's not the piston itself that wears out cylinders, it's the rings. Let me show you what I mean. You see this part of the piston right here? See that shape it has? If you look down here, let me get the light on it. Hopefully you can see that clear. You can see the piston, that same shape right there. That's where the piston comes down. When it comes down, that's where it stops at. Let me show you. Better put this in the right way, huh? Get them rings locked up in there. Right there, that's the furthest the piston comes down. That's bottom dead center. So we'll lift it back up. If you look, you can see the honing right here and the honing right there. Virtually no wear. Same amount of honing. Pistons never touch this spot. Piston has touched this spot every cycle. No wear. Where I do see wear on the cylinder is right up in here. Let me try to get you in the camera better. Right up in, on the exhaust side here. There it is. See that pale spot, that pale line right there? That's wear. That's one ring, two rings. One ring, two rings. Let's see if I can get you up in here even better than that. There we go. One ring, two rings. So that's where your wear is at. Of course, there's very little nickel plating in this spot. There's very little cross hatching left right here. It was wearing right here. Of course, this is the exhaust side. It's the hot side. That might explain a lot of that. Up top here, let me get it cleaned up so I can show you. I can still see a lot of cross hatching here with the we can see some ring marks. I don't really feel any wear as far as there's no ridge or anything, but there's lots of cross hatching still left. And even right here where the rings have been crossing by, I still see cross hatching. So most of the wear, but I do see wear down here. Most of the wear in the two strokes I have found are down around the ports, the port areas. Obviously the rings now have to go across bridges. They have the chance to maybe open up a little bit as they're going through all them bridges, and they have to snug back down when they get back up in the solid part of the bore where there's no more bridges. I don't know. Now this cylinder right here received damage right here, and that's why I replaced that cylinder. But yeah, and the same for the YZ125. I see a lot of cross hatching right here. The one piston ring, you can see where it reaches top dead center. It turns around right here, but there's no real wear. There is no cross hatching right here, just above the exhaust port that was wearing. It has worn away its cross hatching. That's what that tells me. And down here you can see where the rings hit bottom dead center, or the ring, and would turn around. And again, very little cross hatching left there, but tons of cross hatching left down here where only the piston came down, not the piston rings. So I'm going to say it doesn't really matter if you have a cast or a forged piston. Cylinder wear is more dictated on the rings than it is the how your piston is made. Is it cast or is forged? It's really the rings that I see causing the wear, and not the piston itself. So why not just run the OEM piston, the cast piston? What is wrong with the OEM cast piston? In my experience, they break. Okay, I get it. There's going to be someone in the comments, you've gotten 300 hours out of your cast piston. That's all you'll ever use. I get it, yeah. But I'm talking about at race level. I'm talking about on the track where these guys are holding it pinned at every corner, going through obstacles where they're constantly staying on the throttle. In the air, they're jumping multiple jumps, and in the air, they're having to either blip the throttle every jump and then sometimes just hold it pinned because their front end drops and the bike goes da, 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 on the rev limiter. Lap after lap after lap after lap. That's where a cast piston fails, and that's where a forged piston stays alive. It's not so much the play rider or the trail rider or the guy that just really doesn't work his bike. Maybe you do ride tracks, but you're just really easy on your motor. You're not holding it pinned lap after lap. You're not really a fast guy, so to say. You might be okay with the cast piston, like a Vortex cast piston, the OEM cast piston, Pro X cast piston. You might be okay with that. But if you are a faster guy and you're using that motor to its fullest, I'm telling you, get the cast piston out of there, get a forged piston in there, because they do break, and they break right at the skirt area. I don't have any here to show you right now, but I have videos. You can go back to my videos and you'll see videos of people that have broken their pistons. They like to break off at the skirt. Sometimes it's on the intake side, sometimes it's on the exhaust side, but it just snaps them. Sometimes you'll see a crack first going here or going there. At some point it just breaks off. It goes down into the crank area. It locks the crank up. It can damage your cylinder as the little particles start getting all up in the ports here, and the piston's still going up and down, but now you have some skirt area getting right in the middle of the port. It'll just completely wipe your nickel plating. It just tears up the cylinder, locks up the crank, can damage your cases if it gets locked up in the crank just right. Yeah, get rid of the cast piston if you're running your bike hard. I'm telling you, just go with the forged. I've seen it over and over and over again. The bikes that do it more than others, I would say definitely the YZ250 is good at breaking a cast piston. The KX85, KX100, KX112, they're bad at breaking the cast piston. The YZ125 is a little bit bad at breaking the cast piston. The KTM seem to hold up the best with the cast piston, but they break as well. And again, you want to protect your investment. You want to protect your rider. Having a piston in there that can break without notice is not safe for your rider. Now, there are some local race teams or families, race families, that have had decent luck with the cast pistons, but when I speak to them about it, they change it religiously. They don't run them very many hours. I'm talking about 10, 15 hours, maybe 20 tops, and it's out of there. They don't let the piston have a long enough life where it might crack on them. But if they would just run a Wiseco or a Vortex forged piston, or even a CP forged piston, at least they'll never have to worry about it cracking. They don't crack. You'll wear them out. You can wear them out to the point they have no compression, but they just don't crack for no reason. They're not the failure. Anytime I've seen a forged piston crack or break, it's always been because of some other issue that caused it to break. Like it was completely the wrong size for the cylinder, or the crank started going out and it started sending metal shrapnel up to the top end. But it's never just the piston's fault. So again, if you're a faster guy, forged piston is the way to go. If you're play riding, in the woods or whatever, you're taking it easy. There's nothing wrong with the stock cast piston, honestly, as long as you understand that it can crack if you start pushing it hard for an extended period of time and work it real hard, but it'll be okay otherwise. So why does a stock two-stroke come with a cast piston? Why not a forged piston? Why not just send them out with a good strong forged piston? Hey, KTM, it's a race bike. You're supposed to be able to buy it and race it, right? I mean, that's what the KTM owners tell me. But they still come with the cast piston. Why is that? Well, cast pistons don't need to be warmed up as well as a forged piston. And they understand a lot of these people, the high percentage of these people that are buying these bikes, don't have a lot of bike experience. There's a lot of new bike owners that go and buy a brand new bike and they have very little motocross or dirt bike experience. They're just going to start them up and throw them in gear and go. They're not going to warm the bike up properly. I think they weigh out the fail factor, that they'll have less failures overall from their average purchaser if they just use a cast piston. Probably knowing damn well that if you're seriously a racer, you're either going to go ahead and put a forged piston in there, or after you break a piston or two, you'll learn your lesson and go to a forged piston. They probably know. It's no different than like Kawasaki for a lot of years used to put steel handlebars on their bike, and people would ask what them steel. They were just to hold the levers on and stuff on the showroom floor. It wasn't for you to actually really ride that bike with them steel handlebars on there. They knew the average buyer was going to put their own handlebars on there. And your average racer that's taking it serious is going to put their own piston in there. But the average buyer might not be so knowledgeable, and they will just start up their bike and run them hard right away before they get fully warmed up. So that's where the cast piston comes into play. It's good for bikes that aren't going to be properly warmed up. They're less likely to fail in that situation. Where a forged piston, I will say, you need to properly warm these things up. Don't just start them up and throw them on the track and go wide open throttle. Take some time in the pit, let it get some water temperature in it, and then on your first ride of the day, your first 2 or 3 laps, take it easy. During your practice laps or whatever, if it's race day, take it a little easy and let some temperature build up before you start going watt everywhere. If you have to wait a long time to be put on the starting gate and your bike got really cold, take some time to start it up a few minutes before the race starts and just warm the bike up. Get it nice and toasty before you put it on that starting line, drop the gate, and go wide open throttle. Forged pistons do require a more proper warm-up than cast pistons do. It's very important. They're stronger pistons. They're not going to break on you. They're lighter pistons, all that. They're race pistons, but they need a proper, good warm-up, where your stock cast pistons really don't. And I believe that's why they come with a cast piston stock. For the KTM guys out there, I know a lot of you guys are very brand loyal when it comes to using like MOTOCROSS oil and Vortex pistons. You try to always use what the manufacturer recommends, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they come with a cast piston. You might want to change it out to a forged piston. You don't have to go Wiseco. You can stick with Vortex. Like I pointed out a minute ago, Vortex does have a forged piston, and we have put these pistons in 125s and 150s. They're good. They consider it their race piston, so consider that their forged pistons actually consider their race piston. I wonder why. But they do sell it. It does cost more. Keep that in mind. But they have it. We used them in several of them, and these KTM 150s and these 125s. After a while, on some of the bikes, we just started using the Wiseco Racer Elite piston just because it was a better price, honestly. And it has all the same advantages, but it's just a better price. So we started using the Racer Elite piston from Wiseco in these. But Vortex is available and forged if you want to stick with Vortex. And you own a KTM Husky, gas, you have that option. Don't forget to get yourself a new wrist pin bearing. I have seen these fail. I like to change them out every top end for that reason. And lastly, I almost forgot, but before I move on to the 4-stroke pistons, there's for the YZ250 2-stroke, there's your A, B, C cylinders, and the piston size down here. You can see the A, which is their smallest one right here. Let's see, 66.355 millimeters, and their largest 66.367 millimeters. You can see it's not, I mean, we're talking about less than the thickness of the hair on your head. It's a very minute amount. I've heard people like to run a different, you know, if it's a B cylinder, they'll run a D after some wear. but as I've shown you, it's not so much the piston uh, area that's getting worn down on the cylinder. It's more where the rings are riding, and even though the rings might stop right here, the piston does go up all over here, and it's not even wearing that spot. It's only wearing where the rings make contact. And also same thing over here, even on the bottom side, there's no wear where the piston goes right here, all the way down here. You can see the piston never touches there, but it touches there. There's no wear. The wear is only where the rings ride. So why put a bigger piston when that's really not where it's wearing, where only the piston goes? It's wearing where the rings go. I just don't see I don't see any benefit with that at all. I would just run the right size. If you have a B cylinder, they usually have them stamped for you guys that are curious. There it is. If you have a B, A, or whatever, you decide to use an OEM piston with it, just stick with that size. I think this one had it written on it somewhere, but probably faded off. Oh, there it is right there. It's like silver. So I believe that the reason you see most cylinders are a B, I believe that's the size Yamaha shoots for when they're manufacturing these bikes and these cylinders. And if it, for some reason, ends up a little bit tighter or a little bit looser, they just compensate with a slightly different size piston. And I believe that's why they do that. They shoot for a B though, because most of the Yamahas are Bs. And not that it matters, it really doesn't. But if you pay Pro Circuit to put together a race motor for you, it's going to come with a forged piston. It's not going to be a cast piston. They're race pistons. They're stronger pistons. They're less likely to break under stress, and that's the point. You don't want to be breaking a piston mid-race. Okay, 4-stroke pistons. I really don't have a lot to say about them. I honestly really don't. You know? I mean, most of the 4-strokes out there, the modern day 4-stroke, the stock OEM piston is great. I have no problem reusing them. I did on my 450. This was one out of my 450. I ran 60 hours. You can see just a very minute amount of wear right here, right there. Very minute. That's 60 hours, by the way. And I put this in dry. If you watch my videos, you'll see how I put pistons in dry. I don't lather them up with a bunch of oil. But yeah. So I prefer the OEM pistons. This was from a 2015, so it just has the silver wrist pin. Since then, they have gone to a black coated wrist pin. I forgot the coating process name. Oh, drop that. But they have a coating on it that kind of helps eliminate the wear on the upper rod bearing race. So you can see right here where it rides an upper rod. I don't know if you can see, but you can see that like there's a little bit more wear on this side than this side. This side was hardly touching. This side was getting most of the grunt. You can see, I can feel it with this, right? I can feel spots every so often. To eliminate that, the OEM pistons have gone to this type of wrist pin that has like this black slick coating on it. Honda does it, Yamaha does it, I believe Kawasaki does it. And that's one of the advantages of running the OEM piston on your 4-strokes is the piston pin. You'll receive a piston pin with that nice black coating on it. However, with your aftermarket 4-stroke pistons like your Wiseco's, Vortexes, Pro X's, you're not going to get that special black coated wrist pin. You're just going to receive a standard silver wrist pin with them pistons. And so when I weigh that out, as long as I'm sticking with the stock compression ratio and the bike's not known to break pistons, I find it just better to go with the OEM piston on a 4-stroke. I have a forged piston right here for a 4-stroke. This one broke a rod on it. Look at that. But this is a forged piston right here for a 4-stroke. Give you something to look at. Now, where I do find the forged pistons are a good choice on the 4-stroke is, again, if I'm looking to bump the compression. OEM pistons only give you one option on compression ratio, where aftermarket pistons you can get higher or lower compression ratio pistons. So there's one advantage there. And then there's one other time. There are some bikes that I've run through the years of doing this that are just known to break a piston or split a piston. Splitting meaning right down the middle here. It's usually from right down. You see you have your wrist pin right here. It's usually right down here. They put a crack and you just lose your compression. And it's usually from detonation or pinging. But some bikes are known to split easier than others. And when that happens, and I know that particular make and model is known for damaging its OEM pistons, I have moved them over to Wiseco forged pistons, and that has never happened again. So that's the only time that I consider, should I say, them are the only times I consider a forged aftermarket piston for a 4-stroke, is if I need a different compression ratio, or if the bike, the make and model, is known to crack or damage its pistons. And the same is true for your 4-stroke pistons. You don't have to worry about ring end gap if you're using a OEM cylinder, nickel plated cylinder. They're plug and play. You don't have to file ring end gaps or anything. Down in the description, there'll be multiple links to multiple videos. One will be on ring end gap. The other will be on cylinders, how to inspect them for wear, what your options are when it's time to replace it, as well as for your 2-stroke guys, oil ratios. What is a proper oil ratio to run for your 2-stroke, your conditions? So check down the description for that. And I almost forgot, for you guys interested in the Racer Elite piston and how they differ a little bit from the Pro Light or the stock piston, here are some inserts from a previous video I did where I measured that piston out. It's real short, but check this out. The Wiseco Race, it's a Racer's Elite. They used to be called Racer's Choice. I don't know, they changed the name or whatever. But it has a few advantages to it. One of the things that's really unique about it, that stands out the most, is it only has one piston ring instead of 2 piston rings. Oops, like your standard YZ250 piston has. This is a Wiseco with 2 piston rings, Pro Light, and this is a race piston. So that's the first thing that stands out. And this is just an OEM piston, because we're going to weigh these things. We're going to compare them. But so that's the biggest difference that I see. But also I noticed that the skirt is longer, especially on the exhaust side. Here, I'm gonna line up the top right here, the tops of the dome. You see the difference there? Let me double check, make sure these are lined up good. Yep, they're lined up. You can see the skirt's a little bit longer on the race piston on that side, and on the intake side it's just a little bit longer too. Not nearly as much, but it is a little bit longer. It's probably gonna be harder to see on the camera. Yeah, it's hard to see, but it is. It's just a click longer. I know I already broke out the calipers and measured it, so it's definitely longer. 56. I'm getting 76 on the Wiseco Pro Light. Now here's an interesting thing. I already measured this. This one's wider up at the top. That's interesting to me. Hold on. $56.84. So that's $56.84 versus $56.76, and that is what I'm getting now. Let's go back over here. $56.84. I keep saying 56. I'm sorry. $65.84. $65.84. $65.76 is what I'm getting this time. So the Racer Elite piston is wider up at the top. Now, if you know anything about pistons, they're always wider down at the bottom skirt area, and they have a slow taper to narrow them out as they get up towards the dome. It appears though that this one has less of a taper, so there's going to be a little bit less rock up at the top with the Racer Elite. Now I also did measure down here. I chose to measure in this spot right here just because it was good reference points to get my calipers, and this one measures 6604, 6603 now. All right, that was the Racer Elite. It kind of lets me know you know where they're at down here. 6611 for the Pro Light. Let me check the Racer Elite again one more time. Yeah, I see 6604, so it's actually more narrow down there, and whatever rings they come with. This one comes with 2 rings, so we're going to weigh it like that. So let's see what we got. We got 287 grams for the Yamaha stock piston. Let's go to the race piston. Oh, got to put the 282. So what was this one again? The Yamaha 287. So the race piston is a little bit lighter than the stock piston, not much, but a little bit. But the Pro Light piston, I already know it's lighter than both of them. So that's interesting that the race piston is let me get it. The race piston is a little bit heavier than the Pro Light. The Pro Light is 275 grams, 275.5 to be exact. So this is the lightest, the Pro Light, and I guess the name fits it. The racer piston is heavier, almost as heavy as the stock piston, and the stock piston is the heaviest of the bunch. So that's where we're at on the weight. Now keep in mind that this is a new piston. This is a used piston, and so is this one. So actually, technically, these are a little bit lighter, just by a hair lighter than if they were brand new, but still close enough. We got an idea what's going on here. So I think that's all I have on this video. Appreciate all you guys watching. Fortunately, I won't be riding this weekend. It's Saturday and it's already starting to rain, and it's going to rain all day tomorrow. So just gonna rest this weekend and catch up on some things. I will say I did do a camping trip to Croom this week. Camped from Wednesday to Friday, and I got about 3 hours of ride time in between all them days. So at least got some riding in. Wherever you're at, I hope you get a good days of riding in. Be safe out there. Catch you in the next video.